Hello and welcome to another episode of the War Report. And we're just going to get right into it. A lot of news on Syria. So, Putin and Erdogan met today. And a couple things happened before I get into anything too policy heavy. Just a couple of the oddities. Being March 5th, the day we're recording this right now, the anniversary of Joseph Stalin's death. Not only that, but they made the Turkish delegation stand under the monument to Catherine the Great, who, for those of you who are more um, aware of history, should know. Some of the Russian-Turkish wars back in the day. They did not go in Turkey's favor. Let's just keep it brief there. But so it was a very interesting day. Like when it came to those things, those little oddities that a lot of people probably wouldn't notice, but but to get into actual policy, it seems a ceasefire has been reached. Now, we've heard the story a million times before. Now, granted, we've heard it more in Yemen, the ceasefires that last 3 days before they're being broken. We have, I would say, a similar case in this. So, of course, this precedes the Turkish invasion, which sees some pretty heavy Turkish losses, but by no means did the Syrians fare well in that. They took quite the beating themselves. Now, Turkish drones have been getting knocked out of the sky, and Russia has provided S 77s for Syrian aircraft, which are, of course, again, for interception purposes for missiles and aircraft in their airspace. So, that's a long time coming. People have been calling on Russia more. I wouldn't say calling on, but people who have analyzed the situation has said that Russia should be giving more anti-aircraft air defense support to Syria, and we're finally seeing that once Turkey invades. So maybe the controlled ops stories about Israel, maybe a certain subset of people may be right, but I digress on that front. But it seems the tentative agreement at least leaves Sarakib, which is that key terminal city for the highway connections, under some degree of Syrian control. So it looks like things have worked out slightly in Syria's favor, but again, I don't expect the ceasefire to last. I don't necessarily expect Turkish forces to pick up and push right back into Syria again. But what I expect them to throw everything they have at them with the proxies and the militants and the other groups that they back.
Yeah. So this has been quite a ride, considering that land. I mean, it basically seemed like they would lose Sarakib. The last show that we did, they lost it, and we know this is a very pivotal town. It's the next biggest town after Idlib, or Idlib town, which is named after the region. But more importantly for Sarakib, it's where the M4 and the M5 meet. But that 25th unit that initially captured Sarakib and went to fight down in southern Idlib, drove back up and retook Sarakib. And at the moment, there are Russian military police that are patrolling it. And according to the deal that was struck in Moscow, they will keep Sarakib. So it doesn't appear at the moment that they're going to go back to the lines that Idlib had for, well, over a year. So therefore, the M5 highway is protected, and apparently there will be a 12-kilometer, 6 kilometers on each side, demilitarized zone with outposts and so on and so on. Syria did manage to maintain not all, but most land that it had conquered in southern Idlib, and it regained not all, but most of the land that it took from the east around Sarakib. So, but as you say, we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how long, the militants are going to be happy with this situation. We should remember that Erdogan's visit came on the heels when Russia said that they cannot guarantee the safety of Turkish jets in Syrian airspace, which is kind of sad, to be honest, because you would have thought that Russia would have been more invested. But that's the strange nature of a high-profile fourth-generation war. So that's very odd, and it's not like the way we're used to seeing wars being fought. But because, of course, Russia bombed, along with Syria, Idlib and important strategic areas as well, and was crucial in the retaking, along with Hezbollah and the Syrian forces, Sarakib. So, but the situation is very much in play. So we really don't know if this is going to last any longer than a than a Taliban ceasefire. So,
Oh yes, we'll get into that. And
yeah, yeah.
while we're tying
But
things
I,
in, Israel was doing their usual shenanigans, not to the scale that they do, but of course they were striking I believe, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad again. I was listening to the South Front report this afternoon, and that's what it
yeah.
indicated. That's actually what they started out with, and so business as usual. We'll get into some of the stuff with Israel later, but you make a fair point
But
about
however, Israel wasn't all too successful either. Like,
yes.
I mean, most of their missiles were intercepted, and it was only a coincidence that they attacked Syria when it looked like Israel, all of Turkey's gains began to dry up. So, a total fluke.
Now think about that. The Turkish Air Force and Turkish military has been more successful at striking Syrian targets than Israel has. Because, look, those are pretty much two predominant, at least conventional military powers in the region. It's Turkey and it's Israel. And Israel, we give so much money to. We hear about their military prowess, their technological prowess, and how they're just uncontested in the region. And
Right.
not only did we see
And,
these two events separated, we saw them within days of each other. And I think that's a really
yeah,
stark
and that's when
contrast.
Turkey bombs did. Yeah, exactly. And we should add that at least when Turkey bombs, not that we know, but apparently they don't fly under passenger jets to conceal themselves, which Israel did yet again. It's just ridiculous. So they flew next to passenger planes to conceal their whereabouts, to radar. The missiles were launched from Lebanese airspace and so on. Not that Lebanon can really do anything about it.
Yes,
Um,
Lebanon famed for their, they really stand up for their sovereignty. It seems like they really have a lot of weight to throw around in the region.
yeah, yeah. So, but I suppose what we should also get into is how, there's another half to the story. And in many ways, this is the half that is really capturing people's attention. And that is the migrants.
Yes,
And how
but
Erdogan, in his frustration, is upping the ante to the migrant flow that he wants to reintroduce into Europe. Not that that isn't going on steadily day by day. It is, but we're talking about an uptick reminiscent of 2015. And so this is a kind of punishment. However, Denmark, Estonia, the four Visegrad countries, all of them are now, and I believe even North Macedonia, are procuring boats, military personnel, police to the Greek and Bulgarian borders in order to stop the inflow of recent migrants and refugees. While in Turkey, it seems like things are becoming completely unhinged. I've seen videos of like basically refugees that have been in Turkey and Istanbul for quite a while, chimping out, having other, Turks goading them on to get on the buses, absolute mayhem. And this kind of mayhem was absolutely mirrored in Turkish parliament when one of the center sort of civic nationalist Turkish Republican parties denounced what Erdogan was doing in Turkey, and a fight broke out with one of the very heavy right wing parties. Might have been two different right wing parties, and so Parliament had to be suspended, and this came right as Erdogan was flying to Moscow, and it's all over the news. So you can see that there's a kind of tension that's happening to Turkey. We've mentioned this before, that it has tried to play all sides for its own interest to the best of its ability with what it's got, but its ambitions for Syria, I think, are unrealistic. However, it does think that as long as it can use the migrants as a wild card, that it can succeed. The difference, of course, is now different heads of states in Europe are denouncing this. Even the Twitter account for the German government had denounced what Erdogan was doing.
Oh yes.
So, for instance, Sebastian Kurz says that he is backing Greece. Sebastian is the young chancellor of Austria.
Yeah, he's the one who was in coalition with the right wing party that fell apart, and now is sort of in the
That's right.
yeah. Now he's like in the centrist government because of the Russian financing scandal with the, I believe it was the FPO, something like that. But yeah, he's one of the youngest heads of state in Europe, and he's shown to be kind of wishy-washy after that. But yeah, even he's standing with the Greeks when it comes to keeping out the migrants. Like you said, Germany. Macron has done this interesting thing where he'll say, "No, Turkish actions in Syria, they can go ahead," while giving no substantial support to them, but also supporting the right of Greece and Bulgaria to protect their borders. So, again, the typical thing you'd expect from someone like Macron. And the only European country that has actually come out in support of the Turkish actions, not only in Syria, but also when it comes to the migrant waves, is the UK.
All right. Brexit, baby.
Woo!
Yeah. Oh wow. I can't believe, like, we've been saying that it's Brexit is relevant in some ways, but it's not kind of relevant as much as we had hoped back in 2016 and the years that followed. So you see, Britain being Britain, standing up for Turkey, standing up for the migrants.
I'm curious
Is
if
it going to
Boris
take
Johnson's
them in?
heritage has anything to do with this. I hear that what is it, Turkish, like Circassian or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
that joke was going around, but ultimately he Boris Johnson is, again, he's relatively good for the task of actual Brexit. Otherwise, is lackluster, and no surprise he's really with Turkey on this because you can tell throughout his career, whether that was him as foreign minister or just in politics, very anti-Russia, and again sees the vital role Turkey would play in a world order that would contain Russia, or at least a European order that would contain Russia. So he's very cordial to, of course, Turkey for that reason.
Yes, yes, must stand up for Turkey.
But
It never ceases to amaze me, people who like are baffled why Turkey is in NATO. Like, it just never ceases to amaze me. Or when people retort with, "But NATO was there to stop communism." It's like, no. Like, if Russia had remained a parliamentary monarchy, like as it was in the closing months before 1917, and World War II turned out the way it did, Britain's policy would have remained the same.
oh yes, I mean communism was a rallying cry for a lot of the Central and Western European countries that may have been on the fence about it. For example, France, which was a historical ally of Russia, even an ally of the Soviet Union to a degree. But again, it was the anti-communist fervor that was the reason we were able to assemble NATO. But at the end, it was to contain Russian geopolitical power.
Right.
I mean, hell, they even say that keep the Germans down, the Americans in, and the Russians out. They didn't say keep the communists out. I mean, uh, half of NATO countries had not insignificant communist parties. Now, of course, none of them ever came in power, but there were Western communist parties that had influence in their government. If it was about that, you would have seen anti-communist purges within those countries. But we were going off on a tangent here, but I did think that was worth mentioning. But
Mm.
I'm wondering, now that we've seen, of course, after the deal, the migrant flow from Turkey hasn't stopped, but slowed down. And I'm wondering whether Erdogan is redirecting his army, I'm sorry, I mean his refugees, back into the battlefield in northern Syria.
Uh, it's hard to tell. I mean, he's not doing very well in Libya right now.
Oh, no,
Uh,
horribly, in
so
fact.
yeah, in fact, horribly. And Syria now has begun working with the forces against Erdogan in Libya more closely in the last few days. So things aren't going well for him right now. Of course, America didn't get involved. None of the NATO countries got involved. I'm sure they lend some kind of support, like supplying munitions, giving them a clear picture where Syrian and Russian jets happen to be in Syrian airspace and so on. That I don't doubt, whatever they may say. However, there's no other support, and Erdogan has very few avenues to go down. I think, I think the Turks have a lot of pride, and they have a lot of things to be proud about in terms of of a once dominant empire of a massive size that history will always remember. But I think that a lot of egos are wounded right now, mainly because Erdogan had promised that he would, destroy Syria, that he would literally retake Aleppo and Damascus, and thousands of Syrian soldiers were killed. There's no doubt that Syrians did suffer massive casualties. I do believe that. I don't believe it was over 2,000, because if it was, they could never have retaken the land that they did.
Yeah, I also don't think
In
Russia would have been as passive in this if Turkey killed 2,000 Syrian troops.
Yeah, there's that too. There's that too. But simply if what Turkish authorities have been saying was true, there's no way Sarakip could have been retaken. There's no way that they would have generally been able to contain all efforts to retake the southern part that they had taken from the jihadists in Idlib. So none of that would have happened, and yet it did. And so, there's a sense of impotency right now that must be and frustration within Turkey, within Idlib, and even within NATO and Qatar and whatever countries are supporting these guys. So what's Erdogan's next move? I think that's going to depend on what happens with the migrants, and we need about another 3 weeks to figure out that. Is he going to send more? Is he going to capitulate? Tensions right now on the border are even more amped up because he's now sending basically militarized police. These are special units. Some of them of the kind that are in Afrin, in the northern part of Syria, that have been under Turkish control for well over a year now. And they're goading on basically Greek border guards and basically they're fighting each other by shooting tear gas canisters at each other. They're sort of escalating. They are not sort of. They literally are escalating the situation. One migrant has died. So I think a lot of what happens even in Syria is going to depend on what happens with the Greek and Bulgarian borders, with references to refugees.
Oh yes, this tentative peace deal, this ceasefire deal, I don't even call it peace deal, reminds me of what we saw in 2018 when it came to the Idlib agreements before Russia and Syria even wanted to push into Idlib province as a whole. Now we've seen how much that's changed, but it was very tentative. Ceasefires were being broken every week. Russian and Turkish border patrols were, even though they're cooperative, it wasn't the most fruitful relationship between the two. And this most recent one seems like almost a carbon copy of those previous ones, except with the territory gain, the Syrians and the Russians have a bit more weighted on their side. But that's not to say Turkey has no bargaining chips in this at all. And is when this inevitably breaks down within the next few weeks to a month, we will see more migrants because Erdogan has shown that, at least at this point, I believe he's shown at other points, but especially this most recent episodes, that this is not an empty threat. He will do this if he does not get his way, if he does not get his support from Europe or even Russia and Syria. He's even willing to leverage Europe against Russia and Syria, which, I mean, makes sense in a roundabout sort of way. But point being is, he's shown himself to be that unstable actor. Um, Unstable as, for lack of a better term. His decisions are more or less rational, but again, we got into how he's a bit more emotional sometimes, but he's willing to take drastic measures, I'll say in short. And that's eroded a lot of his trust in Europe. Now, of course, the United States will tolerate it because it's sort of a not in my backyard thing where he's also simultaneously serving their interests. The Russians will continue their negotiations so long as both Putin and Erdogan are in power. Now, the post-Putin, post-Erdogan era, which I know is a long way off, that is when we have the potential for this to either completely calm down or spiral out of control, which I have a feeling it'll be the latter rather than the former in that case. But point being is, look, we may get a moment of peace in this. We may get some breathing room, but it is far, far from over.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's amazing. This war is, I think, definitely going to go to 10 years. We're at 9 right now. I think the other thing to watch out for is you get the general sense that when it comes to the migrant crisis, that generally speaking, people are either unconcerned. Well, I mean, they're concerned, but they're not willing to take sides as to who is really responsible for this. And there's another group that basically thinks it's Turkey's fault or NATO's fault. And then there's a slightly smaller group that is basically saying, you know what, this is Russia's fault. Why is Russia not taking any in? And Erdogan might be betting on this sentiment increasing. Now, it's startling that it hasn't increased over the years, over the last 5 years. I think a lot of the reasons why there was a migrant flood into Europe is because of the knowledge that Russia would begin this massive bombing campaign. And I think a lot of people just preemptively left. But Europe is not willing to go through that scenario again. I think they saw what it did for the right populist movements. And I'm basically wondering how long Russia has before Russia is blamed. Like, what is it going to take? Because in a way, what Erdogan is doing, like Idlib itself doesn't have even 1 million people in it. But what Erdogan is doing is he's got this stored power, this stored potential of the migrants, because they're not all refugees, of course. Like you have sub-Saharan Africans, you have Afghanis, everything, Uzbeks,
Yeah, there's
like
some report where only 4% of the ones that they were able to confirm came from Syria, according to Greek officials. And the majority, at 64%, were Afghans. Then I believe it was North Africans, including Algerians, Moroccans, Libyans, whatever. But again, the vast majority were Afghans, whereas only 4% were from Syria.
right. And so I'm wondering how long, because of course when you watch the BBC or you watch, although American news channels are not really covering this war all that much. Um, this of course the highlights are basically on the suffering of families and women and children during the bombings, basically depicting, Russia as a monster and
Yeah,
Assad as
Russia and Assad bombed the last bakery in Idlib, as Mayor Buttigieg said
yes,
during one of the debates.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but like what Idlib represents, including the women and children, is literally the last holdout of this dream for some kind of semi-autonomous state within Syria that like would be like their own little caliphate, like a beacon for Sunnism, and it would mean a state of permanent war within Syria. That's what it would mean.
Oh yes,
And
and it's interesting that you bring that up because I saw this take from the anti-Israel yet pro-regime change in Syria Sunni types that
yeah,
Idlib, if this deal came to be, would be like the Gaza of Syria. Except I think it goes with the clarification because I don't necessarily agree. Unlike Gaza, it would actually be a threat.
yes, yes. So you'd have state actors and non-state actors that would funnel money into it. They would creep over the border. It would totally destabilize Syria permanently. Um, and I think most of the people in the West, maybe don't understand that because of the way the news depicts. Like, yes, those are actual women and children. We get it, but their husbands are jihadis. They're terrorists. They want something in Syria that's not tenable,
Yeah,
and
and these
they're not willing.
I'm sorry, but a lot of these people, not all of them, of course, a lot of liberals have been going off about this, but a lot of these people were the ones who steel clapped when Trump said, "Well, we have to go after those terrorist families too," and now they're crying because Russia is bombing Idlib.
Right, right. I mean, essentially they're no different than all those ISIS camps with the ISIS brides and their children in the northeastern part of Syria. Like, I mean, it's the same deal. That's who they are. And like, you have foreign fighters who've created families there over the last 10, 11 years. Um, Moroccans, sub-Saharan African Muslims. Like, it's just crazy. And it's not tenable. Even if you can want it all you want. You can use your children as pawns in order to get this geopolitical advantage because you don't like a Syria that is like, well, from in Middle Eastern terms, secular. I mean, we wouldn't consider them secular in the West, but the truth is the various Arab tribes that make up Syria. Yes, some of them have family members that are Christians, Catholic or Orthodox. Some of them are Alawites, Shia. Some of them are Sunnis, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that makes things very complicated. But at the same time, it is dividing the country on some religious lines. But you have fighters who are going in there, and they're basically anti-Shia. and they're basically anti-Christian, and they're basically, you know, like there can only be this form of Salafist or Wahhabi type of Islam in this area, and that's it. This is what we want. Well, it's not good enough. You can't have it just because you want it, and it wouldn't be the first time that the West has stuck up for groups like this, where it's served their larger geopolitical um, ambitions. So that's where we're at. I mean, it doesn't. It's no less tragic, but that is this is the group that's being fought against in Idlib.
Yes, and I really can't add much more to that, but several people have been saying that for years. We've been saying that for as long as we've been doing the show. These are not the freedom fighters. These are not the innocent women and children. Again, beyond branding, these people are no different than ISIS, which nobody had a problem with the indiscriminate bombing campaigns against ISIS, which, look, may have been brutal, may have resulted in some collateral damage, which is an unfortunate reality of war, especially in this age. But I don't think many people would cry that we must have a humanitarian intervention to defend these terrorists. Again, quite literally terrorists, which not opposition forces, not freedom fighters. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But one last point I want to finish off on Syria is that apparently, again, these terrorists tried to stage another chemical attack, but actually ended up wounding their own forces with the gas attack they tried to create.
I saw that. That was great.
You think with all those billions coming in, whether that be from Turkey, the Gulf states, the U.S. and other Western powers, that one of these countries that's throwing all this money at them would at least send some advisors, some people who are competent. Look, say what say what you will about the Iranians, but they send advisors with their money. They teach you how to use the stuff that they give you. Yeah, that's one thing in there. That's one thing they have going for them. And that's one reason they're so successful.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's all I have to say on that topic. But let's move on to Afghanistan, and I'll need a second here. So, that Taliban peace agreement, which was an exploratory agreement where we're going to look into peace options. So we were signing the peace agreement that would lead to the peace agreement, which would probably lead to the other peace agreement, and sort of a perpetual chain where this really just never ends. But of course, that all goes out the window because the Taliban attacked. Now, they did not attack American forces. They did not attack American citizens. They did not attack an American embassy. They attacked. They didn't even attack American mercenaries. They attacked Afghan security forces, which means that's completely off the table. Now, going to this agreement, what the main thing was is we were supposed to mainly be brokering an agreement between the Afghan government and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, as they call themselves. We even called them that in the document, which is what is the Taliban in the everyday language. But we go in, we're cordial, we do this, knowing full well that these forces are butting heads and that they are still at war with each other despite the less involved U.S. role. And then we're all of a sudden surprised when these forces go head to head in an attack that was admittedly instigated by the Taliban. Now, there are probably some outside forces egging them on, maybe somebody in the CIA or other intelligence agency. I'm not saying for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody somewhere instigated this attack in order to justify further American involvement in the country or at least maintain the current involvement. But that has fallen off the table, and I don't want to say for certain, but at least from what I remember and from what I've seen so far, it's been one of the more violent years in Afghanistan, not involving U.S. forces, but just in general between the Taliban and other militant groups and the proper Afghan government. I think it's been up there. I think it's been probably the most violent it's been in a few years now.
Yeah, it would seem so. Of course, I didn't think this peacefire, this ceasefire would last all that long. And lo and behold, within 24 hours, it was already broken. Um, and of course, I've wondered, as I said on the last show, what are the geopolitical advantages to America leaving Afghanistan? I don't see any. Sure, maybe the cost, but well, you know, so what? I don't I don't think that the Pentagon or various elites believe that leaving Afghanistan right now would be all that advantageous, and so the costs are incurred, but the alternative would be that um, Afghanistan might stabilize, or might stabilize vis-a-vis some kind of extreme government. Let's say the Taliban eventually succeeds, uh, or you know, let's say Russia and China move in and begin infrastructure projects and so on. Um, I, I don't think that America really likes that scenario, and um, and even if they don't suspect that the One Belt One Road would cross the, I mean, that would be literally insane. To go through Afghanistan. Like, I don't think even China isn't like I don't think China is insane enough. No matter how many development projects that they're doing right now in Afghanistan, and it's a lot. I don't see how they feel that they could integrate Afghanistan into. It's just it seems impossible. However, this only highlights Afghanistan's importance as the One Belt One Road becomes developed within Pakistan, which of course will mean that it will be developed in Iran.
It is
And
funny to look at the current like route since it goes south of Afghanistan through Pakistan and also North Afghanistan through the former Soviet republics in Central Asia, but no
yeah,
routes going through Afghanistan.
no. If Afghanistan stabilizes, if all caps, uh, there could be some tributaries that could worm their way north or south of there from those two divergent roads. But I don't see that in the immediate future. But this is why Afghanistan is advantageous for them, because who knows? Maybe as those projects become more and more concrete, Afghanistan will be a place that can project power outward. The Taliban could end up in Uzbekistan. How did that happen? And could sabotage certain things that are going on in Pakistan, and so on, and so on, and so on.
Hey, look,
So, I
another
mean,
prominent heir to a Saudi, a very rich Saudi family appeared in Afghanistan again, is forming a militant movement. How'd that happen?
no one could have seen this.
Never. What? The ISI is involved? No way.
Yeah.
While we're digging up, while we're basically just repeating the '80s, might as well throw all that in. But I thought I had more to say about Afghanistan, but it seems like every conversation ends the same.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our greatest ally and some of the news going on there, because I didn't even know this was happening until I heard about it today. There was another election in Israel, resulting in neither party or coalition gaining the majority. Of course, that means they'll either have to broker some sort of compromise or go to the polls again. Now, we've covered this extensively. We've covered the past three Israeli elections. Now, you look at it, there was supposed to be a general election in November of 2019, but it was called early in April 2019, which means we've been covering it for almost a year at this point. This is getting. I mean, look, I talk about how much we talked about Khashoggi, but in terms of how long a subject has lasted, just in terms of regularly mentioning it, probably Israeli elections are up there. They're probably one of the top ones. I mean, of course, nothing's going to beat Syria or Iran when it comes to this show, but outside of that, you you now have the third Israeli election in a row that had no results. Like I said, this is getting to
Hmm.
Southern European levels of dysfunctional democracy. I wouldn't quite put it at Latin America yet because in Latin America, when it gets to this point, somebody usually just takes power by force, which has its ups and downs. I won't get into that today. But like I said, this is like Italy. This is like Greece, Spain levels of dysfunction we are witnessing right now, and supposedly the most advanced, developed, and first world nation in the Middle East. Now, of course, Netanyahu absolutely refuses to step down from either party leader or prime minister because he has those corruption charges weighing over his head, and as it stands now, being in that cozy prime minister's office gives him quite a bit of immunities. Now, they've went after his wife, they've went after his associates on these similar things, but they've never been able to touch him because, as I said, he's protected by some of those privileges that come with office. Now, as far as I know, I don't even think there's a push from the opposition party, which would be Gantz and some of the more center right coalition, as opposed to the more solid right of Netanyahu, the more, I guess, say, nationalistic right. Which, yeah, there's something there. But point being is, I don't think any major opposition party in Israel or any major opposition coalition is really pushing that hard to indict him. It's not like a situation you'd see in the United States where, at least in the past few years, where it's we must impeach Trump, we have to get him out of office, or even again maybe not the best comparison when Trump said, "Well, we're going to investigate Hillary Clinton's corruption if we win." It doesn't even seem like there's that kind of rhetoric going around in Israel. Now, I could be wrong. I don't keep much with Israeli internal politics except when they have a failed election, which seems to be more and more often as of late. But I really don't see a way out of this until Netanyahu either steps down as the candidate for Likud party or he ends up croaking. I mean, look, I think he's like in his early 60s, so that'd probably be a long way off. Probably another good 15 years at least in terms of political viability. But I don't see a way this happens until Netanyahu goes. I'm not even saying the Likud party in general has to go. I'm saying they have to run somebody else besides Netanyahu. They have to say, we'll nominate him as party leader. He'll become the next prime minister. And I'm sure there's figures in the party that are there. I mean, I think it's gotten to the point where even Lieberman, the former defense minister, who was actually even more hawkish than Netanyahu, especially on the Syria and Palestinian issue. Now, keep in mind, Lieberman's the one who said we'd prefer ISIS to Iranian-backed forces in Syria. Uh, he's part of the opposition coalition, if I recall correctly. And not even he, and with his rocky relationship with Netanyahu, is calling for any sort of prosecution or anything like that. I mean, there's no way out of this deadlock until Netanyahu is out of Israeli politics. At least from my assessment, I don't see any other way. To the point where, like, yes, of course we don't like him. Of course, a lot of left wingers in the West don't like him. And again, an increasing number of like more nationalistic right wingers who are fed up with Israel's antics when it comes to the relationship with the Western countries, especially the United States. But it seems like an increasing amount of Israeli people are beginning to dislike him, at least as a leader.
Right. I mean, basically, his position as a hardliner has always been there as a protector of Israel, and I there's only so many times that I think he can, because what's happened is, of course, he's settled into this role, and like a switch, he can bomb somebody in Syria, and that's protecting Israel. or he can bomb the Gaza Strip, and so on and so on and so on. Although the one, bombing Syria is very odd, considering that Syria isn't attacking or at war with Israel.
But the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is operating out of
Yeah, that's
Syria.
right.
It's
That's
look,
right.
you thought Hezbollah was a big deal, which look, they've taken care of Hezbollah in Syria, but the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the greatest threat to the state of Israel as of now. Them and their
Yes, yes.
3,000 members, half of which are in Syria.
Israel is surrounded by enemies.
Sad.
Yeah, that never-ending diatribe. So, um, yeah. So what he has is he's completely settled in this role, and a lot of mundane, let's say, types of corruption keep happening with his family, particularly his wife, and he. So this distraction only works so much. I think the hardliners that support him have, of course, a long distance view that back when Shimon Peres was in power, and the so-called the failures of that time when Israel suffered a lot of attacks, and so they're willing to look aside, but the truth is they haven't expulsed every Palestinian. Um, they haven't the Israel that they want is still isn't there, and I suppose that there's a kind of lethargy that's happening, not just with him being all too comfortable in this role, and maybe with people that would like to see Israel go in a slightly different direction, because of course Israel is not going to have a kind of a radically different direction, as most countries don't.
Yeah, and just to bolster that point, we're seeing more and more of a stark divide where the more nationalistic and Zionist Israeli Jews are, of course, very in support of Israel. We have to take care of the Palestinian question right now. We need to do something about that. Whether that's some deal that gives us pretty much free reign over them, or whether that's just expelling them from the territory. Whereas more liberal Jews, not only in Israel but in the West, identify more with the liberal elements of the West, like the Chuck Schumer types, like again, just like places like New York and London, sort of the globalistic view of oh, we're all just one people and we can all live by liberal values. And like you said, like there's something like 8 million Jews in Israel as opposed to what 6.5, 7 million in the United States. To the point where it's almost
Mhm.
a comparable population, and you're seeing again more and more of a stark contrast where the ones who outright support Israel are now taking the more nationalistic direction, whereas the liberal ones are saying, well, yeah, Israel just needs to be part of the liberal world order and that kind of stuff.
Right, right. Because of course, in recent years, the if we're going to talk about attacks, the Palestinians have not been as effective. Um, Israel can easily counter them, and so the threat has to be elsewhere, and it's why Netanyahu, in order to maintain his position, has to continue this fantasy that Iran is going to nuke Israel and so on. And when all it is like Iran is just a power that it's a regional power, and Israel doesn't want to accept it. And you can talk about its proxy groups, but its proxy groups generally are not effective in Israel. Like, they're not. I mean, Israel has managed to build this very intricate wall system. Palestinians are like essentially have their land has been sort of broken up like a jigsaw puzzle. Um, they're not really like the 90s are based in the early 2000s are over. They're not an effective force. They can't bargain for anything. And so that's where the Palestinian conflict with the Israelis has matured to. Um, Israel simply wants to be the most important regional power, and that's why it's at odds with Iran, not because Iran is willing to destroy the third holiest site in Islam in Jerusalem, and take out 5 other million Muslims.
I'm sorry, but you know, Lindsey Graham told me that Obama practically opened the oven doors again when he signed the Iran deal.
Yeah, that was horrible.
Wait, was that Lindsey Graham or Mike? It's one of those ones.
It's one of them. I just want Obama back.
I want my Obama phone. It's been like 12 years. Still haven't gotten it. I don't care if it's like the iPhone Zero. I just want it. But uh, in stark contrast to that, it's time we move into the segment of the show that tolerates zero malarkey.
Yes.
The Democratic primaries. Super Tuesday. Now, I'm both surprised and unsurprised. Now, we saw several candidates suspend their campaigns and drop out of the race as a result of this. Of course, in the lead up to it, we saw one Mayor Buttigieg, who immediately endorsed Biden, as well as one Amy Klobuchar. Same story there, immediately endorses Biden. Bloomberg drop out after he wins, wait for it, American Samoa. Very picking up 4 delegates there. Drops out and endorses Biden, which means, look, we'll be free of those Bloomberg ads, but he's going to pour all that money into the No Malarkey tour. Uh, and that pretty much left Biden versus Bernie versus.
Go ahead. Hello?
So after a little bit of technical difficulties, not only did my mic go out, I forgot to unpause the recording, so we've been sitting here for the past 5 minutes talking into a paused stream. But Super Tuesday, we are finally going to get this. Now, as I said before, I was surprised. I wasn't surprised. Now we had Bloomberg drop out. We had Klobuchar and Buttigieg drop out. Now that's all no surprise, and they all subsequently endorsed Biden. Of course, then Warren dropped out, and she's mulling over who she wants to endorse, and she's crying tears of sadness for all those little girls who never get to see a rich white woman in the office of president. So sad. I know. Well, excuse me. Elizabeth Warren is a proud Amerindian woman. I apologize. I
She would have been
apologize.
the first Native American,
Yes, yes.
the first Indian American to become president.
Feather
What a
not dot.
shame.
Feather not dot. But probably would have gotten a lot of support from the woke Brahmins that we have in the United States. But I digress with that. But I wouldn't say Bernie is down for the count. A lot of people have been writing off his campaign as it's dead. Now, he did not do well on Super Tuesday. The polls did not do well. Massachusetts was either slated to go to Warren or Sanders, and it went to Biden. Now, you could say shenanigans, courtesy of the Democratic establishment, which I would not rule out. I would not rule out if they would, pull some strings in some of these primaries. But ultimately, I think where Bernie went wrong is he embraced sort of the quote unquote woke politics. I don't even want to call it identity politics. I went into this last week. But in 2016, in 2015, 2016, that election cycle, he had some appeal to the white working class, like the people in Michigan, the people in Wisconsin, because especially there, he focused mainly on economics. He focused on issues with healthcare and union and workers' rights, stuff that would go over well there. But now, I suppose this happened in 2016 too. Letting his stage get overrun by activists and people take the mic from him, and really has no backbone, talking about how President Trump's white nationalism is a grave threat to this country, stuff like that, and how we need to. I am going to declare war on white nationalism. If you remember that old bit, I mean,
Yeah.
again, these are the people the like half of these people you're calling white nationalists would have supported you just 4 or 5 years ago. That's where it is. So I'm not saying Bernie's economics, while I disagree with quite a bit of it, don't have some appeal. Again, like I think his healthcare stuff would go over well, at least from a campaign standpoint. Some of the stuff about again, easing the burden on the working man. Now, whether those policies would do that or not, I don't really think is relevant to this conversation right here. Again, this is all campaigning. This is all rhetoric. This is all appeal to the voters. So, if you want to get into the meticulous details, that I'll save that for another time. But again, he went up against Biden, who his success really came from Southern blacks, older Southern blacks, of course, and that was a lot of the Super Tuesday states. And it was funny watching some of the Bernie Bros, start to ask some questions like on that front, and pretty much I would say I know the term racist gets tossed around a lot, but if we're considering anything racist, I think probably what happened on some of those subreddits, some like those forums on Twitter, is probably more genuinely racist than anything the so-called far right has ever said. That's just me. But I wouldn't say Bernie's down for the count because between Bernie and Biden are the only two. Now you could say, oh, Tulsi Gabbard's still in. And as much as I would like to think that she would be able to ascend on the debate stage, even though they're currently in the process of rigging the rules so that doesn't happen this time, I think a one-on-one debate between Bernie and Biden will not go in Biden's favor because you think about it, there was a lot of room for crossfire, even with 5 or 6 of them, where they would attack each other. But when it's just like high energy Bernie, like I know he's a bit kooky, but one thing you can give the man is he's high energy, he's passionate, and he can put on quite a show on the stage. Compared to Biden, who has to memorize his talking points and repeat them over and over, and slips into a demented state and says nonsensical things when he's put on the spot, I think that could do a lot of damage to him. I think again, people realize his gaffes. People, I mean, granted, that's nothing new for Biden. It's just accelerated with his age and mental state. But I think put one on one against Bernie, it might actually do some damage to him. And what I'm still predicting at this point is contested convention where Biden or some other establishment candidate ultimately comes out on the top. Now, I know, again, especially like with H.A. Goodman, some people are saying it's going to be Hillary's time to shine. She's going to swoop in and save them from the crazy socialist and the demented old man. Now, I wouldn't rule that out. I could see because if it's a contested convention, pretty much the party can nominate whoever they see fit, whoever they please at that point. And well, yeah, I wouldn't put it past them to do that. They may like shove her in a VP slot, but my prediction for a contested convention would be they would probably have to get to Biden because again he would probably have the most quote unquote popular support. While putting someone like either Kamala or Buttigieg on the ticket, maybe Warren's again somebody with that appeal to the other side, the consolation prize candidate. Um, but I I wouldn't have expected things to get to the point where the Democrats can't trudge up any candidates beyond Biden and Bernie. And look, I know a lot of the field was. I personally didn't like pretty much any of them, but even someone like Kamala, like Elizabeth Warren, at least the age and at least they, I would say, are decent orators. Now, again, I find them both insufferable to listen to for personal reasons, but I think they could do a lot better with again the mid 50s to the mid 60s candidate who is again kind of that strong powered woman versus Bernie, who again, despite what you may think of him, regardless of what you think of his economics politics, again comes off as crazy kooky uncle as opposed to Joe Biden, who comes off as crazy kooky grandpa who can't remember his own name.
Yeah, American politics also seems like it's back to prior to 2015. It's righted itself away from Trump, and people are strongly considering Biden. I think everybody knows on some level they have to know that Biden is in the early stages of dementia, and basically what they're saying is
Wait,
even
whoa,
a
whoa! Now
guy
listen
with
here. Listen, look, fat. You lying dog-faced pony soldiers, just getting all the classic hits in already.
even an old guy with dementia is preferable to Trump. I mean, that's in a way you have to admire um, the efforts of the media, the efforts of political apparatchiks and um, members of Congress and the Senate who've worked tirelessly for over 3 years to oust Trump, but also to make someone like Biden in his current state palpable. I completely agree with you that if 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 there was a debate, that there could be some surprises, because if he has any more of those senility gaffes that he's been having, like prior to he had one at South Carolina, and of course when he won, he got his wife and his sister mixed up. Though that could have been, they really could have switched switched them. However, in that kind of a scenario, he can really appear as being incompetent. And the truth is, all those efforts to stigmatize the word socialist as if Bernie is actually a socialist, which it's a hilarious idea.
Yeah, it's on the same tier that Trump is a white nationalist. They'll give the dog whistles to their respective camps to get the votes, but again, Bernie is just a neoliberal with social democratic tendencies who likes to, like he'll talk up again like some of the more revolutionary rhetoric, but again, that's all it is at the end of the day, rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, and in a sense, back in 2016, when he was on his campaign, and those two large women, the two large black women that went on stage, um, in a sense, that was a disciplinary action. He had to incorporate the Black Lives Matter, right? So up until then, he hadn't really done it. And since then, of course, he's for open borders. His this idea that Bernie has been really super consistent, I don't think holds water. Maybe the Young Turks seem to think so, but I don't. You could say he's evolved, but then that his Bernie's evolution has really been about him giving up some of the main points of his message in order to not just appeal for votes, but appeal to the Democratic elite, to the people who run the DNC. So we're back kind of at politics, more or less to the way it was prior to 2015. We have the mainstays. I mean, Biden might as well be kind of like a Rubio with slightly more credentials. This guy is like, people are like legitimate about him, and it just makes me think back last summer when I was an ironic Biden account. I had no idea he would really take off. It makes me wish I was back on Twitter as a Biden account. I even use this phrase, no malarkey. So
No malarkey. No
yeah,
malarkey!
so it's astounding to me. But I suppose one of the reasons people can look past Biden's dementia is, I suppose they rationalize it by saying, well, this will give the opportunity for Democrats to take over the Senate and to increase gains in the Congress, and it's not just the president that matters, and so on and so on. And I think they're probably even going to overlook, if he becomes president, the kind of serious gaffes and the way America, because of course they complain about America's image on the world stage with Trump. Well, I mean, it isn't going to get better with Biden. Let's be honest. It'll be bad, and it'll be bad in a different way. So
I
and it'll
mean,
be, in
just
my
like,
opinion, it'll be even worse than with Trump. So
oh yes, because Trump has a modicum of self-control. We've seen this again at the NATO summits when, especially his first one, where he'll be all, "Well, yes, I'm just a normal politician." He'll say the off-the-cuff things to appeal to his base, but ultimately he still has his mental faculties. He still has a sense of self-control. Whereas
yeah,
the dark part of me would like to see Biden like
yes,
with Macron, with Merkel, with Boris Johnson, just just lose it on them when they slightly disagree with one of his
yeah,
suggestions. Like he'll say, "We need to go in, we need to stop Assad," and then like Macron will be like, "That isn't the best idea," and then like I just want to hear him like go off the rails on someone like Macron or any of these like European establishment politicians because.
yeah,
Again, that's the dark part of me. I think a lot of this would be entertaining, especially like with him, like Putin and Xi, and like some of the more adversarial
yeah.
relationships, like just his like reaction, like
I
especially with Putin because after Trump,
yes,
he really has something to prove. Like America must be tough on Russia, that sort of thing.
yeah, yeah. I can see that, and I can see like I can see an escalation with him and Putin, where he finally breaks down and tells Butler, you better stay away from my son." I definitely want to see that. Don't you go after my son. So he's going to make this personal. I have no doubt, like if he
Listen
were
here,
president,
Ivan.
I have no doubt that he will resort to that because it's pretty easy to get him to do it anyways.
Yeah. Ooh, especially him and Zelensky. That would be an interesting one.
Yes, yes. So, so that's where we are in American politics. Uh, not a good look. Biden as president is not a good look. Like, well, I mean, we'll see. Anything's possible. Like you brought up H.A. Goodman. I think it's still a possibility. She, whose name we won't mention, well, Hillary, um, could conceivably come back. I think they're like just the way the whole thing has been set up, as you pointed out, between you know Sanders, the crazy old communist, and Biden, just the crazy old dementia-ridden mainstream Democrat,
Oh,
and
especially with
who's
just
going
the
to
two of
be
them now, Trump can really play them against each other just with Twitter.
right, right. So, I mean, I could see her coming into the fight. I mean, at the very least, that what she's going to do is, I think, endorse Biden if that's the only path forward. Um, and if she decides to, bow out of the race, as it were, if she did come in, they would both of those guys would move aside. Absolutely, I think they would, and
Because it's her turn.
because it's her turn. Yeah. Uh, anyway, what's your opinion about let's suppose this goes to a contested. Um, get if I kind of think like I could be wrong, so that's why I'm asking you. I kind of think that you know the most of the youth, which is basically the youth that's supporting him, um, is going to be absent again. Despite what people said about 2016, 90% of the Bernie Bros voted for her. And, it wasn't this huge crossover. Um, a lot of the people who voted for Trump voted for Obama twice in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania. So let's be honest about this, right? Like, I don't think there was this big migration from the Bernie camp into the Trump camp.
Oh no, I mean there were a few who just like wanted like anti-establishment, and I think the way we could look at it that it broke down is 85-90 went straight Democrat. They sided with the party. About I don't know 7% stayed home, whereas 3% either went Trump or third party.
Yeah.
I'd say that's a fair breakdown of it. Now, with those small
And,
margins,
and
especially
I
in
would
an
say,
electoral system like the United States, that can be enough to swing it. But I mean, it's nothing to laugh at. But again, it's not like there was this mass awakening of the Bernie Bros like they want you to believe.
right, right. I think they just had a bigger presence on Twitter. I think, again, it's real life versus Twitter. And I don't think Bernie Bros are going to migrate to Trump. If they do, it's going to be in much smaller numbers. Now that Trump is like doesn't have, he hasn't been completely successful on renegotiating trade, bringing jobs back. Yeah,
He also doesn't have that flair anymore of sort of just going in and burning down the place and laughing while it burns. He's been tamed for all intents and purposes.
Right, right. So I see even less reasons for Bernie Bros migrating over to Trump. Um, so yeah, short of let's say at least two absolute poor showings because Biden has not done well at the debates. I can't remember a single debate where he's excelled.
Yeah, he's just been shielded by a number of people going at each
Right,
other.
and now he won't have that shield. And Bernie, on the other hand, has had some successful debates. He's never done poorly, and really, it's been Warren that's tried to sabotage him. And you know what? And it's a relief to see Warren out of the race.
But what about
She's
all those
just
9-year-old girls who definitely aren't being put up to this by their liberal parents?
well, in the words of Bernie Sanders, a woman cannot become a president.
Sad, but harsh but true words from Bernie.
Yeah. So Elizabeth Warren, her not being unable to decide who to endorse. I
Translates
think that was
to,
one of the
yeah, who can benefit me more?
right. I mean, as if people don't know that. Like, I mean, any kind of astute follower of politics knows that she was there to siphon off votes from Bernie. That was her whole purpose. Like, how can you have so much in common with Bernie and then not know who to endorse, either Biden or Bernie? I mean, these are the two sort of most divergent of all the candidates. I mean, there were a lot of centrists, and she came off as a kind of female alternative to Bernie. I mean, that's all she basically had to offer. And, constant recommendations that you go to her website to find out the differences between her and Bernie and so on. Uh, so, like, you know, what I don't even understand her point anymore. She will most definitely endorse Biden or not endorse anybody at all.
Yeah, she'll hold her tongue till the convention, but give a speech, just heaping praise upon Biden. I can guarantee you that's what will happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
She'll wait. She'll wait until
she
the
will
end.
never endorse Bernie.
Yeah. Arguably, with how divided the field was, it may have been better on the establishment part to keep her quiet, and it's sort of like what they did with Hillary, and then trot her out last minute to have her heap praise upon the establishment candidate. Now, again,
Mhm.
hindsight's 2020, but again, you'd think, yeah, okay, they're pretty much almost ideologically in line, her and Bernie, but it comes to the clash of personalities. Bernie supporters are not going to forgive Warren for what she did. Now, whether she actually did that or whether they just perceived that she did that, which, in my opinion, I think, again, she was sort of the controlled. She was either the controlled op or trying to play the compromise candidate when, like, well, why pick Joe or Bernie when he can pick both and me? Like, it's sort of that kind of shtick, like banking on a brokered convention sort of thing. But again, she's gonna see who she can get the most out of, who will give her the most benefits, and again, that'll probably be Biden. She'll probably lobby for, oh well, I can be your running mate. Maybe a nice cabinet position when we get to Washington. That sort of rhetoric.
Hmm.
But I I mean, as it stands, again, barring the coronavirus tanking the economy, I don't see how Trump loses this.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Now he has had some guffaws of his own. For instance, claiming that the coronavirus, which we mentioned last week, had a death rate of roughly 2 to 4%, and some healthcare professionals have said it's about 3.4, and he disputed that and said it's actually one, maybe even less than one, and
Just a
it's just
hunch
just a hunch. Yeah,
on
I've talked
Hannity's
to.
show of all places.
Yeah. Um, it's so irresponsible of him, honestly. Like if he wants to get reelected, and I do think that in many ways, for the populist right, for the dissident right, in a way, he's still viable in so much as if he's reelected, there will be certain people who've basically all their lives have been against whatever things that Trump seemed to have stood for back in 2015 and 16, who are, really on the brink of losing it, on the brink of having their spirits crushed. And so, in some ways, I can see the argument that if things went back to, let's say, a pre-Trump world in America, that would actually energize the right more than it would having someone lead for them, which with Trump didn't really happen. Um, but at the same time, I think there's also a viable counter argument to that him being in office um, is like does goad them. It does force them to become more transparent and
Yet, because rhetorically and when it comes to narrative, he's still everything that's wrong. Look, he's taken no major deviations beyond the fact that he's pretty much turned American policy, whether that be foreign or domestic or anything else, into a more blunt, straightforward form, such as when he came out in Syria and said, well, yeah, we're there to protect the oil, of course we are. Or, yeah, we're in the Middle East to protect Israel's interests, of course we are. He'll still do things like that. Now, he'll carry out the policies, he'll do everything they want, but it's the execution, it's the rhetoric that still makes their skin crawl, which, at the end of the day, is better than nothing.
right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
just to touch on one last thing before we go, you figure with the coronavirus, Trump in 2016, if there would have been anything like this, he would have been accused of fear mongering and stoking panic for his electoral prospects. And my question is, like, I think if we still had classic Trump, even just 2018 Trump, he'd really be trying to milk this corona thing for all he can. He would be like, we must have a complete shutdown of immigration. We can't let anyone in at this crucial time because this virus can spread. And the media would be accusing him, maybe rightfully so, maybe again on their part exaggerating. They would accuse him of fear mongering, which at this case, I'd rather have the 2016 fear mongering Trump who really plays it up than this, well, I have a hunch that these numbers aren't right.
Yeah, so things can go for they can go from bad to worse. It really is up to Trump or whoever the hell is advising him. He really does have to stop doing some of the things that he's doing. He could jeopardize himself. So that's basically all I have to say for it's for this part of American politics.
Oh, yes, but one thing I can leave you on is accelerationists rejoice because your choice is either senile Joe Biden, who will inadvertently give away American secrets, or Trump, who stands to be everything wrong with the narrative, despite not doing much. So either way, you get a shake to the American empire's confidence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave you guys on that. Sorry about some of the technical hiccups. We're doing this an hour late, and it seems like this is really an uphill battle to do. But I still think we pulled it off. I think we did a pretty good job. Probably not as good as last week's episode. I think last week's episode is going to be pretty hard to top for a while, but we're almost to episode 100. 2 more weeks from that. So see you guys next time, and goodbye.
See you guys.